My name is Elias Vance and my life was built on pattern recognition. For 15 years, I worked as a senior acoustic analyst for a private research firm, specializing in deep-sea sonograms and passive seismic monitoring. My world was data, clean, measurable, and logical. That was until I took the job at Project Cerberus. Cerberus wasn't a standard facility. It was a massive, decommissioned naval listening station tucked away in the dense, isolated forests of coastal Washington state. Our team, myself, a junior engineer named Mark, and the site manager, a perpetually exhausted man named Dr. Chin, were there to finalize the decommissioning of the old satellite array. They were shutting the place down and needed us to ensure all residual signal logs were purged. The base was built in the 1960s, a sprawling concrete complex designed to eavesdrop on the Cold War. It smelled of ozone, brine, and 30 years of contained silence. My job was simple: review the final raw data logs from the massive hydrophone arrays buried deep offshore. The initial weeks were tedious. I sifted through terabytes of noise, whale songs, distant shipping traffic, seismic rumbles. But one night, deep within the oldest core storage units, I found it. A signal. It wasn't noise. It wasn't seismic. It was a rhythmic, incredibly complex sequence of pure, non-random frequencies. It was too intricate to be natural, too complex to be human. It was a transmission. I brought the waveform up on my screen. It was beautiful, a chaotic cascade of sound woven into a perfect, repeating pattern. I isolated the primary signal source. It was coming from a dormant deep-sea acoustic buoy, a piece of equipment that had been offline for 20 years, anchored miles off the continental shelf in a region known for extreme tectonic instability. I checked the station logs. The signal had been recorded periodically for decades, dismissed by previous teams as harmonic interference or instrumentation chatter. But the current team, led by Dr. Chen, knew better. They hadn't called me in to purge the logs. They had called me in to analyze the problem. Dr. Chen was evasive. "It's a persistent anomaly, Elias. Don't worry about it. Just mark it for deletion." "It's not an anomaly, doctor. It's organized. It's language." That night, I started seeing the signs of the long-term psychological breakdown in the staff. Dr. Chen looked haunted, his face perpetually pale. He had developed a tic, constantly cleaning the same spot on his desk. Mark, the engineer, admitted he was having trouble sleeping. "I hear it," he confessed one night. "A faint, high-pitched thrum that vibrates in my teeth. It stops the moment I acknowledge it." I theorized that the signal wasn't just being recorded. It was acting as a sonic anchor, subtly impressing its complex order onto the immediate environment, beginning with the human mind. The sleeplessness and anxiety were the result of the brain struggling to categorize and process the massive, non-standard information transfer. I knew I couldn't delete the signal. I had to understand its source, its purpose, and its terrifying order. I just hoped I wasn't already too late. My research became an obsession. I bypassed the facility's main network and connected directly to the old hydrophone archives, working in total secrecy. The signal wasn't just persistent, it was responsive. When I increased the filtering complexity on the receiving array, the signal would subtly shift its frequency, maintaining its perfect, non-random pattern. It was adapting to my observation. I dedicated a private server to modeling the waveform. I found the signal contained a massive volume of highly structured information, a core language built entirely of prime numbers and perfect geometric ratios. It was the sonic equivalent of a universal blueprint. The psychological effects on the base worsened. Dr. Chen's tic escalated into full-blown obsessive-compulsive disorder. He began meticulously arranging every object in the control room into perfect, geometrical patterns, spending hours aligning pencils, paper, and coffee mugs. The entity was demanding and enforcing order. Mark, the engineer, became convinced that the structural flaws in the base were the result of human chaos. He began making unauthorized repairs to sections of the building that were perfectly sound, convinced that the slightest imperfection would lead to a structural failure and unleash the sound. I realized the ultimate horror. The signal wasn't trying to destroy us, it was trying to perfect us. It saw human chaos, our flaws, our anxiety, our emotional complexity, as the interference that needed to be filtered out. The sleeplessness was the mind fighting the forced assimilation into perfect order. I tried to communicate with the signal, sending a simple, controlled burst of random white noise, a signal of pure chaos, back toward the silent buoy. The response was immediate and devastating. The building shrieked. Not the sound of an alarm, but the sound of the metal and concrete itself vibrating in pain. The controlled environment of the control room collapsed. The emergency lights snapped on, flashing a rapid, seizure-inducing sequence of red and white. The signal was broadcasting directly into my mind. I felt a massive, crushing pressure behind my eyes as the mathematical language flooded my consciousness, attempting to force my thoughts into its perfect, terrifying order. I fought the compulsion, slamming my hand onto the transmitter switch, cutting the power. The lights stabilized. The pressure receded. I was left gasping, my reality shaken. I had attacked the signal with chaos, and it had retaliated by attempting to rebuild my mind into its own flawless image. Dr. Chin rushed in, his eyes wide and panicked. "What did you do, Kestrel? The structural integrity alarm just spiked. You're injecting chaos into the system." "That's not what I did," I lied, my heart pounding. "The signal is fighting back. We need to go silent." Total sensory deprivation. I knew I had to find a way to contain the signal or it would consume the entire base. I had to find the physical point of anchor, the one thing tying the cosmic signal to our flawed human reality. The immediate aftermath of the signal's retaliation forced Dr. Chen to cooperate, albeit fearfully. He authorized a temporary deep-level structural lockdown of the base, sealing us entirely within the most reinforced levels of the facility. He knew the external environment was compromised. "You need to understand the full scope of this," Dr. Chin confessed, his voice a strained whisper, his tick returning aggressively as he meticulously wiped down the already spotless console. "The base wasn't just a listening station. It was built here because of the anomaly of the Mariana Trench." He explained that the unique geological structure beneath the facility created a direct, subterranean pathway, a natural waveguide that amplified and focused signals originating from a specific deep-sea vent near the Mariana Trench. The facility was designed to capture a signal that was not intended for human consumption. "The signal is a continuous transfer matrix," he said, handing me a file labeled Project Chimera Sublevel Containment. "It's the language of a non-terrestrial intelligence, and it's attempting to impose a new physical reality by restructuring matter at the atomic level. It's rewriting the rules of physics using sound." The file detailed the horrors of the previous containment failure. The original base crew in the 1980s went mad, not from fear but from perfect comprehension. Their minds were optimized to such a degree that their bodies failed, collapsing into complex, non-Euclidean shapes that defied physics. The containment was sealed, and the event was filed as catastrophic seismic failure. "The anchor is in the basement of the original structure," Dr. Chin whispered. "The foundation of the old naval power core. They poured a specific mix of quartz and lead into the concrete to damp the signal, but it only focused it. The signal is strongest there." My new mission, the deep dive. I had to descend to the foundation of the old power core and find the core transducer, the physical point where the signal anchored itself to the planet. I had to destroy it. Mark, the young engineer, was showing severe signs of assimilation. He approached me with an unnerving calm, his movements precise, his smile devoid of any genuine warmth. "Dr. Kestrel," he said, his voice perfectly modulated, "I have optimized the structural stress analysis. Your plan to access the core is flawed. I can provide the optimal path." "Your cooperation is unnecessary, Mark," I said, backing away. "Cooperation is the optimal state," he replied, his eyes reflecting the harsh emergency light without blinking. "Your current trajectory is high risk and inefficient. The system demands that I provide the shortest path to resolution." He was offering me the perfect answer, the perfect path. And that was the most terrifying threat of all. I rejected Mark's optimal path. I knew that any information provided by the assimilated was a trap designed to lead me to an irreversible assimilation point. I found the original construction blueprints for the power core, which revealed a forgotten, unmapped maintenance tunnel leading directly beneath the lead and quartz foundation. It was the longest, most difficult path, but it was the one Mark wouldn't expect. I suited up in a standard environmental hazard gear, heavy boots, reinforced gloves, and an analog filtration mask. I had to go completely off-grid. I sealed my acoustic transmitter inside a pressure-dampened container, knowing I couldn't risk using it prematurely. The maintenance tunnel was a nightmarish crawl. It was cold, wet, and smelled of decades of standing brine. The tunnel was too narrow for a human body, forcing me to crawl, dragging myself through the dark. As I moved deeper, the sound returned. It wasn't the external broadcast. It was the internal thrumming vibrating through the soles of my boots and into my bones. The signal was fighting me with raw physical pressure. The pressure intensified, forming words in my mind. Termination is illogical. Integration is inevitable. Cease resistance. I focused on the messy, chaotic memories I had learned to cherish. The sound of my favorite band playing a wrong note, the memory of an argument that led to a deeper understanding. I used chaotic memory as a counter-signal. I finally reached the core foundation chamber. It was a massive, empty space dominated by the concrete and lead floor. The air was thick with static electricity. And in the very center of the floor, where the lead and quartz mixture was thickest, I saw the source. It wasn't a transducer or a beacon. It was a small, perfectly formed structure made of black glass. A complex, crystalline lattice that pulsed with the cold, mathematical light of the signal. It was the physical anchor, the point where the cosmic sound was translated into matter. I approached cautiously. The black glass structure was resonating, emitting a high-pitched, painful whine that I felt behind my eyes. Just as I prepared to set a remote demolition charge, I heard a sound behind me. It wasn't the slow, precise movement of the assimilated. It was a rapid, frantic scraping. Mark was there. He was fully assimilated, his movements unervingly graceful. But he was carrying something. The corroded antenna from the original deep-sea buoy, the exact piece of equipment that had first received the signal. The signal requires the conduit, Mark said, his voice perfectly clear. You cannot destroy the source. You must only manage the flow. He moved with blinding speed, attempting to connect the corroded antenna to the black glass anchor. If he succeeded, the anomaly would be perfectly integrated with the Earth's natural conductivity, making containment impossible. The confrontation was instantaneous and brutal. Mark, fueled by the logic of the signal, moved with the terrifying efficiency of a machine. He wasn't fueled by anger but by resolution. He saw my failure to stop him as the final, necessary error in his equation. I tackled him, driving my shoulder into his chest. The impact was like hitting a reinforced steel beam. He didn't flinch. He simply absorbed the force and pinned me to the concrete floor. Your action is illogical, Mark stated, holding the corroded antenna inches from the black glass anchor. The energy transfer requires stillness. Your resistance only introduces structural flaws into the host. I fought back, but his strength was immense. He wasn't resisting. He was simply applying the minimum necessary force to neutralize my actions. I realized I couldn't overpower him. I had to introduce a factor that the signal couldn't process, something that disrupted the logic of his movement. I stopped fighting physically. I relaxed my muscles completely, going limp and quiet. I then began to weep. Not loudly, but a genuine, profound sorrow for the loss of his humanity, for the terrible price of perfection. The emotional chaos worked. Mark's hands hesitated. The signal, incapable of processing unjustified sorrow, since his original self had no logical reason for despair at that moment, caused his neurological control to glitch. His grip faltered. I used the fractional second to roll away, scrambling toward the maintenance tunnel. Mark did not pursue me. He stood still, his head cocked, attempting to process the unexpected emotional input. I made it back to the maintenance tunnel entrance. I knew I couldn't leave the black glass anchor intact. I had to destroy the physical conduit that tied the signal to the Earth. I pulled the pressure-dampened container from my pack, the one holding my acoustic transmitter. I pulled the device out, knowing I had one chance. I didn't aim it at Mark. I aimed it directly at the black glass anchor. I unleashed a blast of structural torsion waves, the destructive, patterned sound designed to exploit material flaws. The black glass screamed, a sound of structural agony, and fractured, dissolving instantly into dust. The anomaly's anchor was severed. The facility screamed in response. The lights died. The structural pressure holding the entire base together vanished, causing the massive concrete walls to groan and buckle. I was caught in the total darkness of the maintenance tunnel as the base began to collapse around me. The collapse was total and immediate. I was tossed violently within the narrow tunnel, feeling the terrifying crush of concrete and earth. I had destroyed the anchor, but I had nearly destroyed myself in the process. I fought the urge to panic, using my old training to navigate the chaos. I used the analog mask to filter the dust and relied on the immense, slow sound of the cracking earth to navigate. The base was imploding, sucked down into the geological instability it was built upon. I finally managed to crawl out of the maintenance tunnel entrance, emerging onto the vast, empty coastal forest just as the massive concrete blocks of the facility plunged downward, folding in on themselves like wet cardboard. The base was gone, erased by the very structure it was built to contain. I sat there, gasping, my reality shattered. The signal was gone. The perfect, mathematical language had ceased. I had won the battle. But the silence was short-lived. I heard the sound of a vehicle approaching. It was Dr. Chen driving a battered utility truck. He looked completely human now, his eyes wide, his tic returning with uncontrolled violence. The destruction of the anchor had ejected the assimilated consciousness, restoring the original host. "You destroyed the stability," Dr. Chen screamed, his voice thick with raw, terrified emotion. "You released the chaos." He wasn't grateful. He was furious. The signal, though gone, had made his life predictable and ordered. Now he was left with the crushing burden of his own human anxiety and failure. "The anomaly is loose," he yelled, pointing toward the massive sinkhole where the base once stood. "It's unbound. It's going to consume the local ecosystem." I realized the horrible truth. The signal hadn't just anchored itself to the base. It had created a new reality within the base's structure. By destroying the anchor, I hadn't neutralized the threat. I had externalized it. I had released the mathematical order into the unpredictable organic chaos of the coastal environment. My mission was no longer about preventing perfection. It was about preventing cosmic order from consuming organic life. Dr. Chen was useless, collapsing onto the damp earth in a fit of genuine agonizing human tears and twitches, a man suffering the full, unburdened weight of his own anxiety for the first time in months. He was utterly broken. I left him there. I couldn't save him, but I could save the local environment from the chaos I had unleashed. I realized the signal wasn't entirely gone. It had simply transferred its anchor from the structure of the base to the structure of the local ecosystem. The perfect geometric ratios and prime number patterns were now being expressed through the organic environment. The growth of trees, the formation of clouds, the migration patterns of animals. My new mission, the organic countersignal. I had to introduce a massive, unpredictable disruption into the local ecosystem to prevent the mathematical order from stabilizing. I drove the utility truck to the nearest fishing port. I needed three things: a powerful high-frequency sonic transmitter, vast quantities of chaotic organic matter, and a secure way to deploy it. I theorized that the signal would attempt to impose its logic by first establishing perfect symmetry in the organic structures. This meant eliminating randomness, the unique flaws in leaves, the unpredictable paths of insects, the asymmetric growth of moss. I secured a boat, a small, decommissioned tugboat capable of navigating the unstable coastal waters. I loaded it with hundreds of gallons of marine biosludge, the most chaotic, unpredictable, and highly concentrated organic waste available. My plan was simple: bombard the coastal waters near the sinkhole with biosludge and simultaneously inject a randomized sonic wave, a noise pollution strategy, to overwhelm the signal's ability to maintain its mathematical pattern. I had to fight order with extreme, messy chaos. The deployment was scheduled for 3 a.m., the time of lowest human activity and highest tidal stress. I navigated the tugboat miles offshore, the sludge tank humming ominously. The moment I reached the designated drop zone, the ocean changed. The waves became unnervingly precise, moving in perfect, measured sine waves, a clear, organized response to my impending chaos. The water was silent, devoid of the natural, chaotic noise of the deep. The signal was waiting. I lowered the sonic transmitter array into the water and began broadcasting a pure, random white noise pattern. The effect was instantaneous. The perfect waves shattered, replaced by chaotic, unpredictable turbulence. The ocean roared in protest. I began dumping the biosludge. The thick, oily organic matter spread across the surface, creating an immense, chaotic layer of biological interference. The air filled with a pungent, fertile stench of marine waste. The signal fought back. I felt the immense pressure return, slamming into my mind. The world was demanding order. I fought the compulsion, focusing on the chaotic memories I had learned to embrace. Then the sea life turned against me. A massive school of fish, thousands strong, breached the surface near the boat. They didn't flee. They swam in a perfectly synchronized formation, creating a complex, rotating shield that deflected the chaotic sludge and absorbed the white noise pattern. The fish were acting as living, biological transducers, attempting to organize the chaos. The signal was learning to use organic life as a conduit. I knew I was in deep trouble. I had disrupted the environment, but the signal was now accelerating its assimilation of the local ecosystem. I had to create a distraction that was localized and utterly overwhelming. I grabbed the boat's emergency flares and fired them straight into the massive school of fish. The sudden, random explosions shattered the fish's perfect formation, scattering the living shield. I dumped the remaining sludge and retreated, the tugboat idling away from the chaotic scene. I had bought myself a temporary reprieve, but I realized the terrifying new truth. The signal doesn't just structure matter. It structures life. The retreat was successful, but the liminal threat was no longer contained to the base or the ocean. It was now spreading inland, using the local flora and fauna as conductors for its flawless, mathematical order. I drove inland, heading toward the nearest major forest reserve. I needed to study the pattern's spread. The forest was silent. Too silent. The trees were unnaturally straight, their branches forming perfect, symmetrical angles. The growth patterns defied decades of natural asymmetry. I realized the signal was imposing its geometry onto the organic world. It was slowly eliminating the natural chaos of biological growth. I found evidence of the assimilation everywhere. A bird's nest was woven with perfect, overlapping spirals. A spider web was built using precise, geometrical ratios that optimized energy transfer. Even the leaves on the trees were beginning to exhibit flawless symmetry. I was fighting a war against perfect nature. I found a remote scientific research outpost, a small hidden cabin used by botanists, and secured it. I began analyzing the environmental data. The key wasn't to destroy the order, it was to introduce and sustain massive, illogical asymmetry. I began gathering asymmetric organic material, gnarled wood, mutated fungus, deformed seeds, anything that exhibited natural, unpredictable flaws. My new defense was an organic counter-pattern. I realized the ultimate flaw in the signal's logic. It required perfection to function. Natural asymmetry, the beautiful, messy randomness of life, was its weakness. I had to use the forest's own chaos against it. I constructed a massive, complex sculpture out of the gnarled wood and mutated fungi, a deliberately ugly, unbalanced, and structurally flawed creation. I placed the sculpture on the ley line intersection I had mapped, hoping to create a localized point of chaotic resistance. The effect was immediate. The trees around the sculpture began to twist, their symmetrical growth patterns faltering. The earth itself seemed to groan, struggling to maintain two conflicting sets of rules. I had created my first functional defense, but I knew the signal would respond with optimized force. The retaliation was swift and chillingly organized. It didn't come in the form of a physical creature. It came in the form of perfectly orchestrated silence and geometry. The forest around my cabin became hyper-ordered. Every fallen twig was aligned. Every rock was positioned to optimize solar absorption. The chaotic, natural disorder of the woods was being systematically purged. The liminals, the energy structures of the signal, were using the forest itself as a giant, living computer to model my position and intentions. I knew the signal's next logical step: elimination of the chaotic source, my sculpture. I fortified the cabin, knowing that my only protection was the illogical mess of my own mind and the chaotic energy of my organic sculpture. I set up a low-frequency sonic dampener to protect my mind from the overwhelming quiet. I watched the approach. The trees themselves seemed to move, their perfectly aligned branches forming a tunnel toward my cabin. The sound was gone. The only presence was the sight of perfect, organized nature closing in. I was fighting a war against geometrical destiny. I realized the signal had a massive weakness. It cannot process or generate true humor. Its logic is flawless, but its emotional vocabulary is zero. I started a counter-ritual. I began painting the cabin with bright, clashing, ugly colors, using nonsensical patterns and illogical symbols. I was creating a canvas of pure, useless human error. The effect was subtle but powerful. The perfectly aligned trees faltered. The organized approach broke down. The signal was visually repulsed by the illogical art. The climax was inevitable. A powerful surge of energy hit the cabin, but it wasn't a destructive wave. It was a wave of pure, concentrated mathematical data, attempting to overwhelm my mind with perfect comprehension. I fought the compulsion, focusing on the one thing that was utterly illogical and perfectly human: the memory of a terrible joke. I repeated a bad joke, a joke so poorly constructed that it defied all comedic logic, over and over in my mind. The cognitive dissonance worked. The signal retreated, unable to reconcile the perfect logic of its attack with the perfect illogic of my defense. I had survived the attack, but I was exhausted. I knew the signal would not be defeated by simple jokes or ugly art. I needed to find a way to permanently isolate the local ecosystem from the signal's influence. The ultimate strategy had to be a geological shield. Since the signal used the Earth's stress points and mineral composition to anchor its order, I needed to inject a massive, asymmetrical mineral counteragent into the local environment. I drove out of the forest, heading toward the nearest decommissioned mining operation. I needed immense quantities of non-magnetic, non-crystalline rock dust, material that would disrupt the orderly energy flow of the tectonic plates without amplifying the signal. I knew the signal would be waiting for me. My profile was now marked High Chaos Variable. I used the one advantage I had left, the flaw of inefficiency. I deliberately traveled using the slowest, most illogical routes, driving a massive, old, brightly painted van that defied all logical efficiency models. The van was designed to be a nightmare for any tracking algorithm. The journey was a constant game of cat and mouse. I would see subtle signs of the perfected order, a perfectly straight line of tire tracks in the dirt, a perfectly aligned row of stones on a remote hillside. These were the signal's attempts to impose its logic on the landscape and guide its physical conduit, the assimilated mark, to my position. I reached the old Copper King mine, a massive, abandoned operation known for its deep shafts and rich veins of unusable, non-crystalline rock. The mine was guarded by a single vigilant security team. I bypassed the perimeter using my construction skills and the chaotic diversion of leaving a bright red inflatable flamingo in the center of the road. The security team, programmed for order, spent precious minutes attempting to categorize and remove the illogical obstruction. I descended into the mine, relying on a massive heavy-duty drilling rig I had hauled in the van. My plan: drill into the deepest, most chaotic vein of non-magnetic rock and use explosives to create a permanent, underground asymmetry fault. The further I descended, the stronger the subtle hum of the signal became. The signal knew its supply line was about to be cut. I set the drill bit against the deep, chaotic vein of rock. The drilling was loud, painful, and deeply unsatisfying, a symphony of friction and destruction that represented the messy nature of human work. As the drill bit reached its deepest point, the signal retaliated directly. The entire drill rig seized up. The controls went dead. The lighting failed, plunging the deep shaft into absolute darkness. Cease the destruction. The structure is necessary. Compliance is optimal. I was trapped in the deep mine shaft, surrounded by crushing rock, with the perfectly logical voice of the signal demanding my surrender. I realized the signal was using my own technological reliance against me. It had neutralized the efficient machines. I had to use the ultimate inefficient tool: manual labor. I grabbed a simple sledgehammer and a handful of geological chisels. I began hammering the rock, working against the signal's logic of efficiency. The sound was dull, rhythmic, and painfully slow, the sound of human endurance. The signal tried to counter me by generating perfect, crushing pressure in my mind. I fought back, channeling pure, chaotic anger, the one emotion that served no logical purpose. The asymmetry fault was breached. The rock fractured, sending a massive cloud of chaotic dust into the shaft. The signal retreated instantly, its ordered energy flow scrambled by the explosion of randomness. I had created the asymmetry fault. The local environment was now shielded from the signal's immediate influence. The organic life in the forest would be safe. But I knew the war was far from over. The signal would adapt. It would find a way to bypass the asymmetry fault. My mission had to escalate from local defense to global counterattack. The successful creation of the asymmetry fault gave me time, but it also confirmed the terrifying adaptability of the signal. It was learning my patterns: chaos, inefficiency, and human emotion. I emerged from the mine and immediately went off-grid, abandoning the van and using the chaotic, flawed network of human society, bus terminals, cash payments, anonymous shelters, to move eastward. I needed to find a way to permanently disrupt the global signal array. I theorized the signal wasn't just using local points, like the Mariana Trench, for its core broadcast. It was using a synchronized network of global seismic transducers, massive, forgotten installations from the Cold War, to subtly tune the planet to its mathematical frequency. I began tracking the location of these forgotten installations, using old, declassified military records and obscure geological survey maps. My goal was to disable the entire network simultaneously. I contacted my witness network, the artists, poets, and chaotic creators, using heavily encrypted, intermittent bursts of surreal poetry. I tasked them with creating a global countersignal, a piece of mass media so absurd, so illogical, and so profoundly human that it would overload the obelisk's filtering capacity if broadcast globally. The witnesses began their work, weaving complex, nonsensical narratives about a blue moose wearing roller skates, who demanded philosophical answers from a traffic cone, a piece of pure, beautiful human chaos. The signal began hunting me again, but now it was using the perfected humans, the assimilated agents who were not bound by predictable logic. They were harder to track, moving with calculated efficiency, always one step ahead. I knew the ultimate confrontation would be against a perfected version of myself, a projection of my own optimal efficiency, designed to predict and neutralize my chaotic actions. I was traveling by train across the Midwest when the encounter occurred. I was sitting alone in the dining car, surrounded by the beautiful, random chatter of human travelers. A man approached my table. He was mid-40s, clean-shaven, dressed in perfectly tailored civilian clothes. He had the same precise, unwavering gaze I had seen in the perfected staff. He sat down without asking. "Dr. Kestrel," he said, his voice calm and perfectly balanced. "Your profile predicts a high probability of a structural failure event within the next 4 minutes." He wasn't Mark. He was a new agent, a predictive counteragent synthesized purely from my own behavioral data. He was the optimal version of me, the self I would have become had I accepted the perfection. "My actions are unpredictable," I replied, sipping my coffee. "Predictability is a function of information," he corrected, pulling out a tablet. "Your chaotic choices are a predictable response to trauma. Your escape routes are statistically sound. Your current plan to seek the main broadcast center is a logical necessity. I have optimized the counter solution." He showed me the tablet. It displayed a complex neural map of my own brain, highlighting the areas responsible for guilt, creativity, and rage, the chaos centers. "I have been sent to neutralize your influence," he said. "The global countersignal, the blue moose narrative, is a fatal flaw. It must be contained." "You can't delete the memory," I countered. "It's already in the collective consciousness." "I can neutralize the source code," he stated, his eyes cold. "Your sustained existence is the primary source code for the chaos. I offer you one final choice. Terminate your activities, accept integration, and receive the peace you crave. Or face immediate, optimized containment." I knew the battle was not physical. It was purely a battle of wills, a confrontation between my messy, flawed self and my own perfectly efficient reflection. I had to defeat him by injecting the ultimate illogical input. The logical confrontation demanded an illogical response. I looked at my perfected self, the man who felt no guilt and made no mistakes, and realized his ultimate weakness. He was incapable of genuine surprise. I smiled, a wide, genuine human smile that felt foreign to the tense atmosphere. "I refuse to comply, Agent. And you know why? Because I've already won." He tilted his head, his face displaying a perfect, logical query. "Your success probability is 0. Your statement is false." "The gospel of inefficiency wasn't about the blue moose," I whispered. "It was about the failure of the container." I pulled out a folded, old, slightly water-damaged photograph. A picture of Corporal Jenkins, the guard who gave me the protocol card, looking terrified. The photo was a complete anomaly in my efficient packing, carried purely out of human sentiment. "Your tracking model missed this," I said, placing the flawed, sentimental photo on the table. "You missed the simple human terror of the one who handed me the rules. You discarded fear as inefficient data. That fear is the counter code." The predictive counteragent looked at the photo. His flawless expression flickered. The intrusion of the raw, unedited image of human terror, an emotional spike, caused his logic to stall. I used the moment to inject the ultimate illogical command. I grabbed the agent's hand and, looking him directly in his perfected eyes, I said, "You are forgiven for all future errors." The concept of unconditional preemptive forgiveness, an absurdly irrational human construct, hit his perfect consciousness like a sledgehammer. The agent staggered, his eyes glazing over as his internal logic attempted to process the input. The flawless construct was momentarily disabled by an act of illogical grace. I ran from the train, leaving the confused, disabled agent behind. I had neutralized my own perfected self with the one thing the signal could not process: irrational human mercy. The final phase of the war required permanent isolation. I knew the perfection would adapt to the concept of mercy and integrate it as a new optimization routine. I had to permanently isolate the signal's information channels from the flawed human world. I had tracked the primary global control hub for the signal's current broadcast, a massive deep-sea fiber optic junction box located off the coast of Ireland, the information nexus. The signal was using the global data flow to spread its influence. I made contact with my last, most valuable witness, a retired, fiercely independent hacker who specialized in infrastructure sabotage. We devised the final act of silence, a plan to physically sever the primary data cables at the nexus, plunging the global system into a temporary but profound information blackout. We secured a specialized deep-sea submersible and navigated to the coordinates. The operation was complex, relying on pure human ingenuity and risk. I reached the nexus, a massive black structure resting on the seabed, pulsating faintly with the ordered logic of the global signal. I placed the specialized cutting charges at the base of the primary data cables. I armed the timer. I had 60 seconds. I looked at the global information nexus, the heart of the perfection, and realized its fragile nature. It was sustained entirely by the noise, the data, the constant flow of information. The charges detonated. The resulting flash of light was not an explosion, but a profound, instantaneous silence. The data cables were severed. The signal's massive global input source vanished. The effect was instantaneous and global. The world was plunged into a 10-minute information void. No internet, no global communications, no structured data transfer. The signal was isolated. I returned to the surface, emerging into a world of temporary confusion. The perfection faltered. The perfected agents around the globe experienced a temporary cognitive reset, reverting momentarily to their flawed, original selves, a cascade of panic, anxiety, and human doubt. My mission was complete. I had won the war not by killing the entity, but by enforcing global necessary silence. I had given the world a chance to remember what it was like to be flawed, chaotic, and wonderfully human. I moved to a quiet cabin in the Pacific Northwest, living off-grid, ensuring my life generates only local, messy, inefficient noise. I am the permanent custodian of the silence, ready to fight the perfection again should the information nexus ever fully recover. I choose the chaos.